Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I want to start today with a scenario. Imagine you have a beautifully cooked steak in front of you. Or, if you're a vegetarian, a complex, nutrient-dense quinoa salad.
Sounds good.
It is. But here's the problem. That steak, or that salad, in its current form is, well, it's completely lethal to your internal biology.
That is a dramatic way to put it, but you're not wrong.
I mean, if I took just a tiny piece of that steak and somehow injected it directly into your bloodstream, you'd go into shock.
Oh, absolutely.
Your immune system would attack it as a foreign invader. It would clog your capillaries. It would be a complete
It
disaster.
would be a massive medical emergency.
And yet, to survive, we have to put that exact thing inside us. We have to make it part of us.
Yeah.
So when I was reading through the source material for this, I was just struck by this central tension, the paradox of eating. To sustain life, we have to utterly destroy the complexity of what we consume.
That really is the core theme of gastrointestinal physiology. You are taking the complex architecture of another organism, whether it's a cow or a plant, and you have to dismantle it. You have to strip it of its identity.
Its identity.
Yes, its biological identity.
Ah.
A protein in a cow is built to be a cow protein. It has a specific three-dimensional shape, a specific function for that animal. Your body can't use cow protein.
Right.
It can only use the universal building blocks, the amino acids. So the gut's job is to take this foreign, Lego castle, smash it down into individual bricks, and only then allow those bricks to cross the border into your blood.
So today, we're exploring that demolition project. We are tracking the physiological journey from the mouth all the way to the cell. And we're going to look at this not just as, chewing and swallowing, but as this incredible industrial scale chemistry set.
Exactly. We're talking about regulation, we're talking about enzymatic specificity, membrane transport, all the really intricate engineering that turns a meal into molecular fuel.
And to guide us through this, we're synthesizing two of the absolute Bibles of physiology.
Heavy hitters for sure. We have Ganong's review of medical physiology, specifically the chapter on digestion and absorption. And we have the Guyton Hall textbook of medical physiology, their corresponding chapters on the topic.
And having read both, it feels like they have very different personalities. Ganong feels like the mechanic's manual. It's obsessed with the parts. It wants you to know about the SGLT1 transporter, the specific pumps, the molecular handshakes. It's very granular.
It is, whereas Guyton reads more like the architect's blueprint. It steps back and looks at the big picture, the flow rates, the volumes, the physics of the whole system. It's concerned with the why and the how much, just as much as the how.
So we're going to try and combine the mechanic and the architect today. But before we get into the enzyme mechanics, I have to give our standard disclaimer.
Right.
We are interpreting these texts to help you understand the structure of the physiology. This is a guide. It's a map. It is not a replacement for the territory.
Absolutely. If you are a medical student preparing for your exams or a clinician brushing up, please go read the chapters, look at the diagrams. We're here to help it all click, but the books are the source of truth.
Okay, let's dive in. Section 1, the design principles of the gut.
Before we even look at the stomach or the intestines, I want to clarify the mission. We use two words interchangeably in regular English, digestion and absorption. I'm digesting my food. But physiologically, they're totally different things, right?
They're completely distinct phases. Think of digestion as the demolition. It's purely a chemical process. It's the process of cutting bonds.
Okay.
Absorption is the logistics. It's the border crossing. It's moving the materials from the outside world into your internal environment.
Let's stick on digestion for a second. When we say we are breaking down food, what is actually happening chemically? Is it just dissolving?
No, it's not just dissolving. That's a great question. I mean, sugar dissolves in water, but it's still sugar. Digestion is a very specific chemical reaction called hydrolysis.
Right. If you break the word down, hydro means water, and lysis means to split or to break. Almost all our major food molecules, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, they're built by a process called condensation, where you remove a water molecule to link smaller units together.
So digestion is just the reverse of that.
Precisely. You are forcing a water molecule back into that chemical bond to snap it. If it's a carbohydrate, you insert water to split the sugars apart. If it's a fat, you insert water to pull the fatty acids off the glycerol backbone.
And for protein.
Same principle. You insert water to break the peptide bond that links the amino acids. It's the universal demolition tool.
So fundamentally, digestion is just adding water with a pair of scissors.
In a sense, yes. And the scissors are the enzymes. Without those enzymes, hydrolysis would take, years. With enzymes, it takes seconds.
Okay, that's demolition. Now, absorption. Yeah, this is moving the bricks into the body. But here's something that always trips me up, the donut hole idea.
Ah, yes. It's a great way to visualize it. The gastrointestinal tract is a tube that runs through the body, from mouth to anus, but technically the space inside that tube, the lumen, is continuous with the outside world.
So if I swallow a marble, that marble, when it's in my stomach, isn't technically inside my body yet.
Correct. It is in a tunnel running through you. It hasn't entered your internal environment until it crosses the epithelial lining of the gut and enters the blood or the lymph. That crossing is absorption.
And this brings us to a major logistical problem. Guyton calls it the surface area problem. If the gut was just a smooth pipe, like a garden hose running through us, we'd starve to death, wouldn't we?
We absolutely would. There just wouldn't be enough of a contact patch.
Right.
If you treat the small intestine as a smooth tube, it's maybe 4 meters long. The surface area would be something like half a square meter.
Which is tiny.
It's nowhere near enough space to absorb the thousands of calories and all the micronutrients we need every single day.
So how does the body solve this? How does it create more surface area?
It cheats. It folds the surface. It uses this kind of fractal-like strategy to massively expand the surface area within a confined space. Guyton uses the tennis court analogy.
Wait, we have a tennis court inside of us.
Functionally, yes. The total absorptive surface area of the small intestine is estimated to be about 250 square meters.
Wow.
Which is roughly the size of a singles tennis court.
How on earth do you pack a tennis court into your abdomen?
You fold it, and then you fold the folds. And then you add texture to the folds on the folds. It's a multiplier effect.
Okay, walk me through that.
So first, on the largest scale, you have these big folds you can see with the naked eye. The folds of Kirkring, they're these circular ridges in the intestine wall. They alone increase the surface area by about 3-fold.
Okay, so we're tripling it right off the bat.
Then covering those folds, you have the villi. These are millions of tiny finger-like projections sticking out into the lumen. They're about 1 millimeter long. They look like the pile on a velvet carpet.
And they add how much?
They increase the area another 10-fold.
So now we're at 30 times the surface area of a smooth tube.
And finally, we go microscopic. If you zoom in on a single epithelial cell on one of those villi, its surface membrane isn't smooth either. It's covered in what we call a brush border. Thousands of tiny microvilli.
Okay.
And that increases the area another 20-fold.
So 3 times 10 times 20.
You're looking at a 600 to 1,000-fold increase in total surface area, from half a square meter to a tennis court.
That is just staggering. And I guess clinically, this is a huge deal if you lose that surface area.
It's everything. Think about celiac disease. In severe untreated celiac, the immune system attacks and flattens these villi. It's called villus atrophy.
Right, lose the fold.
You lose the multiplier effect. You go from having a lush velvet carpet to a worn-out linoleum floor. You go from a tennis court back to maybe ping-pong table.
I mean, what happens then?
You can't absorb nutrients effectively. You get malabsorption, weight loss, diarrhea. You are effectively starving no matter how much you eat. It really highlights that anatomy isn't just structure, it's function.
It's engineered function. Now, speaking of huge numbers, let's talk about the fluid economy. This part of Guyton really blew my mind. I try to drink my 8 glasses of water a day. So maybe 1.5, 2 liters.
Which is pretty standard. We ingest about 1.5 liters of fluid a day on average.
But the text says the gut handles 9 liters of fluid every single day. 9 liters. Where on earth is the other 7.5 liters coming from?
It's coming from you. This is the secret river inside us. It's all secretions.
Secretions.
Yes. Your salivary glands secrete about 1.5 liters. Your stomach pours in another 2.5 liters of gastric juice. Your liver adds about 0.5 liter of bile. The pancreas gives another 1.5 liters.
And the intestine itself.
And the small intestine itself secretes about 1 liter. So you add that all up, it's about 7 liters of your own body fluid being dumped into the gut.
So we're dumping 7 liters of what is essentially processed blood volume into our stomach and intestines every day.
That's a good way to put it, yes. We draw fluid from the plasma and dump it into the gut to create this liquid slurry that's necessary for digestion and absorption to happen.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, we only have about 5 liters of blood in total.
It would be fatal in minutes if we didn't get it all back. This is why the gut is, above all, a recycling machine. You have roughly 9 liters entering the top end of the pipe.
The 1.5 we drink plus the 7 we secrete.
Exactly. But by the time all of that reaches the end of the colon, only about 100 milliliters, a tiny fraction, is actually lost in the feces.
So we reabsorb 98 or 99% of all that fluid.
We have to. It's non-negotiable for survival. And if that reabsorption mechanism fails, for example, with a toxin like cholera, which both blocks absorption and stimulates massive secretion, you can see how catastrophic it is.
You lose liters of fluid in hours.
And that causes circulatory collapse. Your blood pressure plummets, your organs fail. You die of dehydration while literally expelling liters of water. It's a very stark reminder that digestion involves this massive high-stakes game of fluid management.
Okay, the stakes are high. So let's start the journey. We're going to walk through the system, organ by organ. Step 1, the mouth. We tend to dismiss saliva. It's just wetness. It helps the food slide down. But Ganong points out that chemically, saliva is actually quite unusual.
It's very unusual. If you look at its ionic composition compared to the blood plasma it's derived from, it's almost upside down.
What do you mean upside down?
Well, plasma is high in sodium and chloride. It's salty. Saliva, at least at rest, is the opposite. It's high in potassium and bicarbonate and very low in sodium and chloride.
Why? I mean, the fluid has to come from the blood initially, right?
It does. And this is where we see a beautiful physiological mechanism that Guyton describes as the two-stage pump.
Two-stage pump.
Right. Imagine a salivary gland is like a bunch of grapes. The little grapes are the acini, the blind ends where the initial fluid is made. The stems are the ducts where the fluid flows out into the mouth.
Okay, grapes and stems, I can picture that.
In stage 1, in the grapes, the acinar cells secrete a fluid that is basically identical to plasma. It's salty. It's isotonic.
Okay.
But then in stage 2, as that fluid flows down the stems, the ductal cells lining the ducts go to work. They are modifier cells. They actively pump sodium and chloride out of the fluid and back into the blood. And at the same time, they pump potassium and bicarbonate into the fluid.
So they're scrubbing the salt out and swapping it for potassium.
Exactly. They are reclaiming the precious sodium so you don't lose it every time you salivate. But, and here's the clever part, this pump has a speed limit.
Just a speed limit.
The ductal cells can only modify the fluid so fast. If you're just resting and saliva is flowing very slowly, they have plenty of time to scrub almost all the sodium out. The final saliva is very hypotonic, very watery, not salty at all.
But what if you're, say, eating something really sour and your mouth floods?
That's the key. If you are stimulating the gland maximally, the flow rate becomes a torrent. The primary secretion rushes past those ductal cells too quickly for them to keep up.
They can't catch all the sodium in time.
Exactly. So at very high flow rates, the final saliva becomes much saltier, much more like the original plasma it came from.
That is fascinating. So the actual taste of your own saliva changes based on how fast you're making it.
It does. And of course, saliva isn't just modified water, it's a chemical weapon. It contains things like lysozymes and thiocyanate ions.
Which do what?
They're bactericidal. They attack the cell walls of bacteria in your mouth. So saliva is your first line of oral hygiene, your first line of immune defense. It also contains antibodies, specifically IgA.
And of course the digestion part.
And the digestion. Yeah. It contains ptyalin, which is salivary alpha amylase. It starts chopping up starches. If you chew a piece of bread for a really long time, it starts to taste sweet.
That's the amylase breaking the starch down into maltose, a sugar.
That's exactly what's happening. But as you pointed out from the reading, ptyalin isn't really that effective in the grand scheme of things.
Why not?
It just has a very short window of opportunity. As soon as you swallow that food bolus, it drops into the stomach. And the stomach is an acid bath. Amylase is a protein, and it works best at a neutral pH. The moment it hits the intense acid of the stomach, it gets denatured. It unfolds. It stops working.
So the acid wins.
The acid almost always wins.
Let's talk about the control here. Most of the lower gut is controlled by hormones, but the mouth seems different.
The mouth is the major exception. Salivary secretion is exclusively under neural control. There are no saliva hormones. It's all driven by the autonomic nervous system, and the parasympathetic branch, the rest and digest system, is dominant.
And this is what leads to the classic Pavlovian response.
Right. The control center is in the brainstem in what are called the salivatory nuclei. These nuclei get inputs from the tongue, from taste, from the nose, from smell, but also from the higher cortex.
So you don't even need food.
You don't. Just thinking about a lemon or hearing a dinner bell or smelling a steak can trigger those nuclei to fire and start salivation. It's a perfect example of feed-forward control. The brain is prepping the system before the food even arrives.
Okay, so we swallow. The food goes down the esophagus, which we'll skip for now because it's mostly just a muscular transit tube and it lands in the stomach. The acid vat. This is where the engineering gets really intense. We have these specialized cells, the parietal cells, that are pumping out hydrochloric acid.
The parietal cells are the heavy lifters of the stomach, no question.
I want to focus on the sheer magnitude of what they're doing. Gannon mentions the concentration gradient, and it's almost unbelievable.
It is, energetically speaking, one of the most extreme things the body does. The concentration of hydrogen ions, which is what acid is, in the blood is very, very low. The pH is about 7.4.
And in the stomach?
In the stomach lumen, the pH can get down to 0.8. That is a concentration difference of nearly 3 million to 1.
3 million times.
3 million. Imagine trying to pump water up a hill that is 3 million times higher than where you started. That is the chemical pressure these tiny cellular pumps are fighting against.
And how do they do it?
They use a very specific machine called the H plus K plus AT pace. We call it the proton pump.
The proton pump.
It uses cellular energy, ATP, to physically force hydrogen ions out into the stomach lumen against that massive gradient.
And this is the pump that drugs like Prilosec and Nexium target, right? The PPIs.
Exactly. Proton pump inhibitors. They are designed to specifically jam this one machine. If you stop the pump, you stop the acid.
I mean, there's a weird chemical side effect of this process that I love, the alkaline tide. Can you explain that?
It's a beautiful bit of chemistry with cool systemic implications. To get a hydrogen ion, an H plus, to pump out, the cell splits a water molecule, H2O. It throws the H plus into the stomach. But it's left with the other half, a hydroxide ion, OH minus.
Which is a base.
A strong base. The cell has to get rid of it, or its own internal pH would skyrocket and it would die. So it combines that OH minus with CO2 to make bicarbonate, HCO3 minus.
And where does that go?
It can't go into the stomach. That would defeat the purpose. So it dumps the bicarbonate into the blood.
So for every molecule of acid it shoots into the stomach, it shoots a molecule of base into the bloodstream.
Precisely. So right after a very heavy protein-rich meal, while your stomach is churning out acid, the venous blood leaving your stomach actually becomes more alkaline. Your systemic blood pH can rise slightly. That temporary shift is the alkaline tide.
That is wild. Your whole body's blood chemistry shifts just because you ate a burger.
It does.
But why do we even need all this acid? I know it kills bacteria, which is a great protective function.
Right.
But physiologically, does the acid itself digest the food?
Not directly. That's a common misconception. Acid on its own isn't very good at chopping up protein chains, but it is the essential trigger for the real weapon of the stomach, which is an enzyme called pepsin.
Pepsin. And this introduces a really clever safety concept called the zymogen.
Yes, it's a critical safety mechanism. The stomach lining is made of protein. If the cells that line the stomach produced a fully active protein-eating enzyme, like pepsin, inside themselves,
They would digest themselves from the inside out.
they would dissolve. It would be autocatalysis, not ideal. So instead, they produce an inactive precursor called pepsinogen. That -ogen suffix in biochemistry always means inactive precursor.
Okay, so pepsinogen is harmless.
Completely harmless. It's secreted into the stomach lumen. But when pepsinogen hits the acid, specifically a pH below about 3.5, the molecule changes shape. It unfolds a bit, it chops a piece of itself off, and it becomes the active, dangerous enzyme, pepsin.
So the weapon is only armed once it's safely outside the cell and in the designated kill zone of the acid bath.
Correct. And then once you have a little bit of active pepsin, it helps activate more pepsinogen. It's an autocatalytic positive feedback loop. A little bit of pepsin makes a lot more pepsin very quickly.
And what does pepsin do that's so special?
Its main claim to fame is that it's one of the few enzymes in the body capable of efficiently digesting collagen.
Collagen, the connective tissue in meat.
Exactly. It's the tough stuff. If you don't have pepsin, you have a very hard time breaking down the structural integrity of meat, getting at the nutrients locked inside the muscle cells.
But this brings up that classic question. If the stomach contains acid strong enough to dissolve zinc, and an enzyme specifically designed to liquefy meat, why doesn't the stomach digest itself? It is meat.
It's a constant battle, and it relies on what we call the gastric mucosal barrier. It has two main components.
Okay.
First, the epithelial cells are joined together by extremely tight junctions. They're practically welded together so that acid can't seep between them and get to the tissues underneath.
And the second component?
Is the mucus. The surface cells secrete a very thick, tenacious layer of mucus. But it's not just slime.
It's a chemical shield.
It is. The mucus is infused with bicarbonate, so you have this incredible microenvironment. In the middle of the stomach lumen, the pH might be 1.0 or 2.0, extremely acidic. But if you were to measure the pH right at the surface of the cell, underneath that 1 millimeter thick mucus layer, the pH is 7.0. It's perfectly neutral.
Wow. So the acid is neutralized before it ever touches the cell membrane.
That's the goal. But it's a very thin margin of error. And if you disrupt that mucus barrier, say, by taking too many NSAIDs like aspirin or drinking too much alcohol, you strip away that shield. The acid gets to the cell dies, the tissue erodes. That is a gastric ulcer.
It's literally self-digestion.
Exactly what it is.
Now, before we leave the stomach, there is one more critical secretion. The texts say this is the only strictly essential function of the stomach. You can live without the acid, you can live without the pepsin, but you cannot live without intrinsic factor.
Correct. Intrinsic factor is a glycoprotein, a type of protein secreted by those same hardworking parietal cells. And its only job is to find and bind to vitamin B12. We'll talk about this more in the vitamins section, but the short version is, if you do not have intrinsic factor, you cannot absorb vitamin B12 from your food. Period.
And without B12.
Without B12, your red blood cells can't mature properly in the bone marrow. You develop a condition called pernicious anemia.
Which used to be fatal.
Absolutely fatal. Before we understood this, it was a death sentence. Now, of course, we can treat it with B12 injections, bypassing the gut entirely. But physiologically, secreting intrinsic factor is the stomach's most critical contribution to your long-term survival.
Okay, let's talk regulation. The stomach doesn't just run on a timer. Guyton breaks it down beautifully into 3 phases: cephalic, gastric, and intestinal.
Right. This is a perfect example of how the body anticipates and then reacts to a meal.
So phase 1 is cephalic.
Cephalic just means related to the head. This is the brain telling the stomach to start the engine before the food even arrives. You see food, you smell food, you think about food, and the vagus nerve fires. It tells the stomach to start making some acid and pexinogen. This accounts for about 30% of the total secretion for a meal.
Feed forward. And phase 2, gastric.
This is when the food actually arrives in the stomach. 2 things happen. The stomach wall stretches, that's distension, and the proteins in the food act as chemical signals. Both of these trigger the release of a hormone called gastrin.
And gastrin is the main driver.
Gastrin is the gas pedal. It powerfully stimulates the parietal cells to ramp up acid production. This is the main phase, responsible for about 60% of the response.
And then phase 3, intestinal.
This is the break. Once the stomach has done its job, it starts to empty its contents, this acidic slurry called chyme, into the small intestine. But the small intestine is much more delicate. It can't handle a fire hose of acid all at once.
So it needs to slow things down.
Exactly. When the intestine detects the incoming acid and fat, it sends hormonal and neural signals back to the stomach that say, whoa, slow down, stop secreting so much, and slow your emptying. This is called the enterogastric reflex.
So the intestine throttles the stomach's output to make sure it doesn't get overwhelmed.
It forces the stomach to release the chyme in small, manageable squirts. It's a feedback control system.
Which brings us to the next organ. That chyme enters the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum. And here we meet the pancreas. I feel like the pancreas is the unsung hero of this story. We talk about the stomach a lot, but the pancreas is the real chemical powerhouse, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The stomach is a sledgehammer. The pancreas is a precision machine shop. And it has 2 distinct jobs to do here. Job 1, put out the fire. Job 2, digest everything else.
Let's start with job 1. The acid coming from the stomach is a major threat.
It's extremely dangerous. It can burn the duodenal lining, causing duodenal ulcers. And just as importantly, all the powerful pancreatic digestive enzymes, they cannot work in an acidic environment. They require a neutral or slightly alkaline pH.
So we have to neutralize the acid.
Immediately. And this is controlled by a beautiful hormonal loop. When that acid hits the duodenal wall, specialized cells called S cells detect the low pH. They respond by releasing a hormone called secretin into the blood.
Secretin?
Secretin travels through the blood to the pancreas, and its message is simple. We have an acid emergency. We need bicarbonate now. The pancreatic duct cells respond by flooding the intestine with a fluid that is incredibly rich in bicarbonate.
It's a biological fire extinguisher.
It's a perfect analogy. It neutralizes the stomach acid, raising the pH from around 2.0 all the way up to 7.0 or 8.0, creating the perfect environment for the next step.
And once the pH is safe, job 2 begins.
Digestion. And this is controlled by a different hormone, cholecystokinin or CCK.
And what's the trigger for CCK?
The trigger for CCK is the presence of fats and proteins, or rather partially digested proteins called peptones in the intestine. Specialized eye cells detect these and release CCK.
And what does CCK tell the pancreas?
It tells the pancreas, okay, the coast is clear, the pH is right, send in the enzymes. And the pancreas responds by dumping this potent cocktail of amylase for carbs, lipase for fats, and a whole suite of proteases for proteins.
But again, we have that self-digestion problem. The pancreas is making enzymes that can digest protein, fat, and carbs. The pancreas itself is made of protein, fat, and carbs. Why doesn't it just explode?
This is a critical clinical concept. The pancreas uses the same zymogen trick as the stomach, but it adds an extra failsafe. It makes trypsinogen, which is inactive. But inside the little storage granules where it keeps the zymogens, it also co-packages a molecule called trypsin inhibitor.
What's that for?
It's the safety pin on the grenade. Even if a few molecules of trypsinogen accidentally activate into trypsin inside the pancreas, the inhibitor immediately latches onto them and shuts them down.
So the activation can only happen when it's supposed to.
It can only happen when it reaches the intestine. There's an enzyme called enterokinase, which is literally anchored to the brush border, the wall of the intestine. When trypsinogen flows past and bumps into enterokinase snips it, boom, you get active trypsin.
And then trypsin turns on everything else.
Exactly. Trypsin is the master switch. It activates all the other pancreatic zymogens. So the entire activation cascade only happens in the safe zone of the gut lumen.
What happens if the system fails?
Then you get acute pancreatitis. If a gallstone blocks the pancreatic duct, for example, the enzymes can't get out. They get backed up and they pool inside the pancreas under high pressure.
In the inhibitor.
Eventually, the trypsin inhibitor gets overwhelmed. The grenade goes off inside the factory. The pancreas starts to digest itself. It is one of the most excruciatingly painful conditions in medicine, and it's often life-threatening because you are, in essence, dissolving one of your own vital organs.
That is terrifying. But when it works, it's brilliant. Okay, so let's track the specific nutrients. We have the enzymes. How do we actually break this stuff down and get it into the body? Let's start with carbohydrates, the energy currency. We eat starch in potatoes or bread. Salivary amylase started the job. Pancreatic amylase continues it. So what are we left with?
We're left with smaller sugars, mostly maltose, which is a disaccharide 2-glucose molecule stuck together, and some other small oligomers.
But here's the rule you mentioned from the texts. The intestine can only absorb monomers, single sugar units.
That's a hard and fast rule. There is no transporter in the adult human gut to bring maltose across the cell membrane. It's too big to fit through the door.
So we're stuck at the border. We need one final step.
We need one last snip, and this happens right at the surface by the brush border enzymes. Embedded in the microvilli, right next to the transporters, are the final scissors, lactase, sucrose, and maltase. They snag the disaccharides as they float by and snap them into their constituent monomers, glucose, galactose, and fructose.
And this is where lactose intolerance comes from.
Precisely. If your body stops making the enzyme lactase, you can no longer split lactose, which is the sugar in milk.
So the lactose just stays in the gut.
It stays in the lumen, and now basic physics kicks in. Osmosis. That undigested sugar is a solute. Solutes attract water. So instead of water being absorbed out of the gut into the body, water is pulled into the gut.
That causes the bloating and diarrhea.
Yes. And then, to make matters worse, the bacteria down in your colon find this unexpected sugar feast. They ferment it and they produce gas. So you get bloating, cramping, gas, and osmotic diarrhea, all because you're missing one tiny molecular pair of scissors.
Okay, let's say we do have the scissors. We've made glucose. How does the glucose actually get into the intestinal cell? Ganong describes this amazing transporter, SGLT1, and it seems like it works on a kind of buddy system.
This is one of the most important concepts in all of physiology. Secondary active transport.
Yeah.
Imagine the intestinal cell is a nightclub. Glucose wants to get in, but the bouncer, the SGLT1 transporter, won't open the door for glucose by itself. But sodium also wants to get in. In fact, sodium is desperate to get in because on the other side of the cell, the back door, there's a pump, the sodium-potassium pump, that is constantly throwing sodium out into the blood. So there's this huge electrochemical vacuum for sodium.
So the sodium gradient is the real power source here.
Exactly. Sodium comes rushing towards the door, wanting to flow down its concentration gradient. The SGLT1 transporter essentially says, okay, sodium, you can come in, but you have to bring a glucose molecule with you.
It's a buy one, get one free ticket.
It is. The massive energy of sodium rushing downhill is used to drag the glucose uphill against its own concentration gradient into the cell. They enter together.
That is so elegant. You use the sodium battery to power the glucose uptake. Does fructose do the same thing?
No, fructose is the oddball. It uses a completely different transporter called GLUT5, and it moves by facilitated diffusion. It doesn't use the sodium drag. It just flows downhill along its concentration gradient.
Which means it's probably slower.
It's slower and less efficient than glucose absorption. This is actually why many sports drinks now use a mixture of glucose and fructose. You're targeting two different doors at the same time.
You saturate the SGLT1 door with glucose, and you use the GLUT5 door for fructose to maximize the total rate of fuel delivery.
Precisely.
Okay, that's carbs, monomers only, powered by sodium. Now, proteins. We know pepsin and trypsin chop them up into smaller pieces, but do we have to go all the way down to single amino acids, or is the protein border patrol a little more lenient?
It's a bit more lenient, which is a key difference. While carbs absolutely must be monomers, proteins can be absorbed as single amino acids, but also as dipeptides, which are 2 amino acids, or tripeptides, 3 amino acids.
Oh, we have a special transporter for that.
We do. It's called pepti-1. It's a peptide transporter.
How does pepti-1 work? Is it sodium again?
No, pepti-1 uses a hydrogen ion, a proton gradient. It co-transports the peptide along with the proton.
But wait a minute. If we absorb a small peptide, a chain of 2 or 3 amino acids, doesn't that violate the rule about foreign identity? If that chain gets into the blood, isn't that a foreign protein fragment?
It would be, and the body is very smart about this. It has a final trick. The peptide enters the intestinal cell via pepti-1, but once it is inside the cell's cytoplasm, there are intracellular peptidases that attack it immediately.
So they finish the job inside the house.
They finish the job. They chop that tripeptide into single amino acids before it is allowed to leave the cell through the back door and enter the blood.
Ah, so the blood never actually sees the peptide. The fragment is laundered inside the cell.
Precisely. To the rest of the body, it just looks like a pure stream of single amino acids. The cell does the final cleanup in-house.
There is one major exception to this, right? In infants.
Yes, and this is crucial for immunity. Newborn babies have what we call leaky guts in a good way. For the first few months of life, they can absorb whole intact proteins via a process called endocytosis, where the cell literally engulfs the protein.
Why would they need to do that?
Because they need to absorb antibodies, immunoglobulins, from their mother's breast milk. Antibodies are massive proteins. If you digested them down into amino acids, they would be completely useless. You need the whole antibody to fight infection.
So the baby drinks the milk, the antibody stays intact, crosses the gut wall, and enters the baby's bloodstream to provide protection.
That's passive immunity. But this window closes. After a few months, a process called gut closure happens. The gut matures and stops absorbing whole proteins. This is also why we think, perhaps, that introducing certain foreign proteins too early, before gut closure, might be a trigger for developing food allergies.
The body sees that whole protein as an invader.
Fascinating.
Okay, now for the hardest problem.
Ooh.
Fats. Carbs and proteins are generally water-soluble. They dissolve in the watery chyme. But fat is oil. The gut is water. They don't mix. And the digestive enzymes, like lipase, are themselves water-soluble. So how does a water-based enzyme attack a giant hydrophobic oil blob?
It's the salad dressing problem. You can shake up a vinaigrette and get tiny droplets, but the moment you stop shaking, they all merge back together into a bile layer of oil on top. You need a stabilizer. You need a detergent.
Enter bile.
Enter bile, produced by the liver, stored and concentrated in the gallbladder. Bile contains bile salts and lecithin. These are what we call amphipathic molecules.
Meaning they have a split personality.
Exactly. One end of the molecule loves fat, it's hydrophobic. The other end loves water, it's hydrophilic. So they can act as a bridge between the oil and the water.
So they coat the fat droplets.
Yes. They stick their fat-loving tails into the big triglyceride globule, and they leave their water-loving heads facing out into the water. This emulsification process shatters the big globules into billions of tiny microdroplets and, crucially, prevents them from reforming.
And this massively increases the surface area for the enzyme to work on.
Massively. It turns a single inaccessible grease ball into a huge accessible surface. Now, the pancreatic lipase can latch on and start its work.
And lipase breaks the triglyceride down into...
Oh.
What exactly?
Yeah. It cleaves off 2 of the fatty acids, leaving you with 2 free fatty acids and 1 2-monoglyceride.
Okay, so we've digested it, but we still have to get these fatty products to the intestinal wall to be absorbed. And there's a barrier there called the unstirred water layer. Can you explain that?
Sure. Right up against the brush border of the intestinal lining, the fluid isn't mixing much. It's a stagnant layer of water. Fatty acids and monoglycerides are, well, fats. They can't swim through that water layer on their own. They would get stuck.
So they need a boat.
They need a ferry boat.
Right.
And this is the second job of the bile salts. They form a structure called a micelle.
The micelle.
A micelle is a tiny sphere, only about 3 to 6 nanometers in diameter. The bile salts arrange themselves so their water-loving heads are on the outside and their fat-loving tails are on the inside, creating a tiny, oily pocket in the middle.
And they load the fats into that pocket.
They load the fatty acids and monoglycerides into that pocket.
Ah.
Now, because the outside of the micelle is hydrophilic, it can swim effortlessly through the unstirred water layer and get right up to the cell surface.
It's like a little submarine.
It is. It ferries the fats to the door, dumps its cargo.
Yeah.
The fats diffuse out and into the cell, and then the empty bile salts bounce back into the lumen to pick up another load. They're recycled. This is part of the enterohepatic circulation.
Okay, the fat is now inside the intestinal cell. Now here's the part that seems completely counterintuitive to me. The body spent all this energy breaking the triglyceride down. But once the fatty acids are inside the cell, Ganong says the cell immediately rebuilds it back into a triglyceride.
Yes. Inside the cell's smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the cell takes those fatty acids and that monoglyceride and re-esterifies them back into a triglyceride. It's like taking a Lego castle apart brick by brick to get it through a small mail slot and then immediately rebuilding the entire castle on the other side.
Why? Why would it do that? Why not just ship the fatty acids into the blood?
It's all about maintaining gradients. Absorption of fats relies on passive diffusion. Diffusion requires a concentration gradient, moving from high concentration to low concentration. If the cell filled up with free fatty acids, the concentration inside would quickly equal the concentration outside in the micelle.
And diffusion would stop.
The traffic jam. By immediately converting the fatty acids back into triglycerides, the cell keeps the free fatty acid concentration inside the cell near zero. It's tricking the diffusion gradient into thinking the cell is always empty.
That is incredibly smart. It hides the evidence.
Exactly. But now you have a new problem. You have a big fat blob of triglyceride inside the cell. You can't just shove that into a blood capillary. It's oil and water all over again. It would clog everything.
So we need a bigger package, a shipping container.
We need the chylomicron. The cell wraps this reformed fat globule, along with some cholesterol and phospholipids, in a protein skin. This makes the whole particle water-soluble. But chylomicrons are huge. They're too big to fit through the tight pores of a normal blood capillary.
So they can't enter the blood directly from the gut.
Not directly, so they take the side road. They enter the lymphatic system. The gut has these specialized lymphatic vessels in the villi called lacteals. They have much larger, leakier pores. The chylomicrons are exocytosed from the cell and slip into the lacteals. From there, they travel up the lymphatic system, through the thoracic duct, and are eventually dumped into the venous circulation up near the neck in the subclavian vein.
Which means dietary fat bypasses the liver on its first pass.
Correct. Everything else, sugars, amino acids, goes directly into the portal vein and straight to the liver for processing. Fat gets dumped into the general circulation first. It hits your heart and your lungs and your peripheral tissues before it ever sees the liver.
Which is why, after a really fatty meal, your blood plasma can actually look milky or cloudy?
Yes, that cloudiness is from the billions of chylomicrons circulating in your blood before they're cleared by the tissues.
Wow. Okay, section 8. Just a quick look at vitamins and minerals. I want to zoom in on iron because physiologically, iron seems to operate on a completely different logic than everything else. With sugar or fat, the body basically absorbs as much as you eat. If you ate 5,000 calories of sugar, the body says, sure, come on in, and then deals with the problem of obesity later. But with iron, the body is a very strict bouncer.
The body is extremely paranoid about iron, for good reason. Iron is absolutely essential for hemoglobin and oxygen transport. But free iron is also highly toxic. It generates damaging free radicals. And worse, bacteria love iron. If you have free iron floating around, you're practically begging for a systemic bacterial infection.
And the other problem is we can't get rid of it.
That's the real issue. We have no active mechanism to excrete excess iron. We can't pee it out. Once it's in the body, it's very hard to get out. So all the regulation has to happen at the front door, at the point of absorption.
And this is the mucosal block theory.
Right. When iron enters the intestinal cell, it has two possible fates. Path A, it can pass through the cell and enter the blood if the body needs iron. Or path B, it can get trapped.
Trapped how?
The cell produces a storage protein called ferritin. Ferritin acts like an iron sponge or an iron jail. It binds the iron and holds it securely inside the cell.
Okay.
And here's the ruthless but brilliant part. Intestinal epithelial cells have a very short lifespan, only a few days. Then they're sloughed off and excreted in the feces. If the iron is trapped in ferritin inside that cell, it gets sloughed off with the cell. It never truly enters the body proper.
So it came into the foyer, but it was kicked out of the building before it ever got to the living room.
Perfect analogy. The body decides how much iron to let in by controlling how much of it gets trapped in this temporary holding cell.
And let's quickly touch on vitamin B12 again. We said it needs intrinsic factor from the stomach.
Right.
Where does the actual absorption happen?
At the very, very end of the line, the terminal ileum. That's the last few feet of the small intestine.
Which is important clinically.
Hugely important. If a patient has a disease like Crohn's affecting that specific part of the bowel, or if they have that part surgically removed, they will inevitably become B12 deficient no matter how much B12 they eat. The ticket intrinsic factor is useless if the terminal ileum, is gone.
Okay, finally, the colon, the large intestine. By the time the chyme gets here, most of the valuable nutrients are gone. So what is the colon actually doing?
It's a dehydrator and a fermentation tank. First, water. We talked about those 9 liters of fluid. The small intestine does most of the heavy lifting, but the colon does the final crucial squeeze. It actively absorbs sodium, and water follows, turning that liquid chyme into semi-solid feces.
In the fermentation part.
This is the microbiome at work. We as humans cannot digest dietary fiber like cellulose. We just don't have the enzymes. But the trillions of bacteria living in our colon do.
So they eat what we can't.
They ferment that fiber, and as a byproduct, they produce things called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. The main ones are acetate, propionate, and butyrate.
And these are good for us.
They're vital. Butyrate, in particular, is the primary fuel source for the colon cells themselves, the colonocytes.
Wait, so the cells of the colon wall don't get their energy from the blood?
They much prefer to get it directly from the gut lumen, from the butyrate made by bacteria. Think about that incredible symbiosis. You feed your gut bacteria the fiber they need. In return, they produce the fuel that keeps your own colon lining healthy.
If you starve the bacteria with a low-fiber diet, you're also starving your own colon.
That's one of the key theories behind the importance of dietary fiber. It's a beautiful system.
Okay, last section. Regulation of intake. We've built this amazing digestive and absorptive machine. But what tells us to put fuel into it in the first place? The brain-gut axis.
The hypothalamus in the brain is the command center, and it's constantly balancing these two opposing sets of signals, hunger versus satiety.
Let's meet the players. On the hunger side, we have ghrelin.
Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. It's primarily secreted by the stomach, but interestingly, it's secreted when the stomach is empty.
So it's the empty stomach signal.
Exactly. It travels up to the brain and it screams, "We are hollow. Find food. Initiate feeding behavior." Its levels rise sharply right before your normal meal times and then crash as soon as you eat and fill the stomach.
And the counter signal, the main satiety signal.
The main long-term one is leptin. Leptin is the satiety thermostat. It's all about long-term energy regulation.
And it comes from our fat cells.
It's produced by your adipose tissue, your fat cells. The logic is simple and elegant. If you gain body fat, you have more fat cells, so leptin levels in your blood rise. The brain senses this high leptin level and interprets it as our long-term fuel stores are full.
And then it suppresses appetite.
It suppresses appetite, and it can also increase your metabolic rate to burn off some of that excess energy. It's a classic negative feedback loop designed to keep your body weight stable.
It sounds like a perfect system. So why do we have an obesity epidemic? Why doesn't the high body fat in an obese person produce high leptin and just switch off their hunger?
And that is the tragic obesity paradox. Obese individuals have massive amounts of leptin. Their blood is flooded with it. The signal is screaming, "We are full." The problem is the brain isn't listening anymore. It's become leptin resistant.
Resistant.
Yes. It's like someone ringing a doorbell so constantly and so loudly that eventually the homeowner just unplugs the buzzer. The signal is there, but the receptor in the brain isn't responding.
So what does the brain think is happening?
The brain misinterprets the lack of a signal as starvation. It thinks you have no fat stores, no leptin, so it does the logical thing for a starving person. It ramps up hunger signals, and it lowers metabolism to conserve energy.
That's a vicious cycle. The body is actively fighting to maintain the obesity because the thermostat is broken.
It is a tragic physiological trap. It really reframes the issue away from just being about willpower, and shows it's a profound hormonal and neurological dysregulation.
Absolutely. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the two-stage pump in the mouth to leptin resistance in the brain. If a listener takes away just one core concept from this deep dive, what should it be?
I think it goes right back to your opening thought, that usefulness emerges through transformation. The gut is a rigorous, selective border guard. It has to be. It deconstructs the entire outside world into a simple universal language: glucose, amino acids, fatty acids before it grants entry. And the staggering complexity of the machinery, the proton pumps, the zymogens, the micelles, the transporters, it's all there to manage the danger and the difficulty of that transaction.
It's high risk, high reward, every single meal.
It is. Every meal is a demolition project, a chemical war, and a logistical miracle all happening at the same time.
I will never look at a sandwich the same way again. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, I would seriously encourage you to go check out the diagrams, especially in Ganong's chapter on this. Seeing a picture of the SGLT1 transporter or the formation of a micelle really makes this stick in a way that audio alone can't quite capture. Until next time, keep diving deep.